Tell me all your traumas.
I don't know what all is going to be public on the podcast. My dad passed away last year. It's not good, but it's okay. I think it's a really beautiful thing that happens in life when you can kind of like work through it. And it's really taught me a lot about appreciating life. That was his really loving way of preparing me for the world.
Jenny Schoellhorn climbed from leasing agent to regional VP at Entrata while raising 4 kids and flipping the script on corporate culture. With 13 years in multifamily, she's shaking up how teams embrace tech and navigate change by keeping it real while pushing boundaries. Join us for a straight talk on growth, culture, and bringing your whole self to work.
So I learned really young to set goals. Dad was really big on setting us up for success, which I appreciate. I needed to set my eyes on a scholarship. I was always academic minded. My dad was super academic minded. It's been a really beautiful journey for how sad it is to not have him with me.
I've often thought about that. I'm like, wait, why am I so different? So do you think about that? Why do you think you're different?
That's a great question.
Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, same. For those that don't know you, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your childhood and what that was like.
We're going straight to
childhood.
Just right there. How'd you grow up? Tell me your life story.
Tell me your life story.
Okay.
Tell me all your traumas.
Okay, we'll go there. We'll start there. I had a great childhood. I was a lucky kid. I had 2 parents who were very loving. A brother. My brother's an overachiever. That probably factors in somewhere.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I'm pretty sure he got a perfect score on his SAT.
Oh, he did?
Like that smart. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
He's a doctor.
You said he's older?
Older.
How many years older?
2.
Okay.
2 years older.
Is there any competitiveness between?
Yeah, obviously. Of course there is.
Yeah.
No, I'm super competitive, hyper competitive, but we're great. I mean, we had a great relationship growing up. My parents were awesome, also high achievers. So my dad, he actually worked for Lockheed Martin. He was a literal rocket scientist.
Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Carrollton, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, so a little suburb in Dallas area. Grew up in the same house my whole childhood. Never moved.
Really?
Yeah.
And your parents still live in that same house?
They moved when I had my first kid.
Okay.
Moved closer to the grandbaby.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, and your brother, so what was the competitiveness like growing up then?
It was good. I mean, it was all fun and games, but we just grew up in a very achiever-based household. So I knew from a young age, I needed to set my eyes on a scholarship and I was always academic minded. My dad was super academic minded. So I learned really young to set goals, I guess you could say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking ahead. And my dad was really big on setting us up for success, which I appreciate now that I'm a parent, especially, right? I think when you're a kid, sometimes that can feel like a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, it's easy to look back and be like, oh, that was his really loving way of preparing me for the world. So lots of good life lessons. First impressions matter. Perception is often reality. That one I hated. I didn't love that lesson. I'm like,
well, that was a lesson that he would.
Yeah, he's like, it doesn't really matter what the truth is. It matters what people think.
Mm.
And I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but I do think it tends to be true, right? Like what people perceive is the truth a lot of the time. So you just kind of, I think the lesson he was trying to teach was you always have to play it above board.
Yeah, because in some ways, everybody's perception, I don't know, I'm probably going to butcher this, but everybody's perception, even the way people see colors is totally different.
Totally.
Right? So
totally.
It is true in that there's not really one reality because it's really just your perception of that reality.
So I think on the other side of that, as a grown person, I have so much more appreciation for those types of lessons. My dad passed away last year. And so I think it's a really beautiful thing that happens in life when you can kind of work through it. And it's really taught me a lot about appreciating life. And I think it kind of unlocks this new piece of yourself. So I found that really fascinating over the last year to just kind of reflect on a lot of stuff like this, the life lessons that I got from him and the parts of me that are from the way I was raised. It's been a really beautiful journey for how sad it is to not have him with me, but walking through that grief is cool. And it's something that you get to share with other people who've been through it. And you kind of join this unfortunate club of other people who've had loss, but that really understand life in we're going right in.
We're going
right there. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But just understanding loss in that way and appreciating what it does. I don't know how it changes you, how it shapes you. and you get to carry that with you. I don't know, like I think about my dad every day, you know, but in a really beautiful way. Like he's with me. We didn't always have a great relationship, but in my adult years, and especially watching him as a grandpa, was like the sweetest thing. And so getting to carry that and see like how life played out has been really cool.
Has there been like phases of processing that?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think so. I mean, I think, he actually struggled with some health issues for a long time. And so it wasn't necessarily a surprise. He kind of had a health episode and was in the hospital ICU for a few weeks. And so we kind of knew it was coming. We had some time. But it was unfortunate because there wasn't a time, from the time he was admitted where we really had like a cognitive conversation afterwards. So there wasn't necessarily like a very clear saying goodbye. But we did have time to kind of process there. And then since then, I mean, I am not like a hyper emotional person. I'm very like, I'm going to think through it. And so just kind of thinking and reflecting has been the most healing process for me of like, I don't know, just kind of respecting that memory and giving it a spot in your heart and in your life and being willing to talk about it, I think is easy. So when people are like, oh, I'm sorry for your loss, like I appreciate it, but like I'm good because I've just, I don't know, you just kind of work through it and it becomes a part of who you are. And I think you have a choice. You can let it, change you for the better, or you can sit with it. I think all answers are right? Like however people handle it, it can be right for you. But for me, I'm like, I'm going to embrace what this means for me. And for me, it's a new view on life that's kind of beautiful.
Yeah, I was talking about this with a friend. It's easier to process things by talking because I feel like the more I talk, and probably why I'm starting this podcast, the more I talk about something, it clarifies like my thinking.
Yes.
So for you, how do you see that balance between like, and I have many friends who internally process things. How do you see the balance between internally processing and externally processing?
That's a great question. I think you have to make time and give a place for each, right? So I think sometimes in our world, it's easy to turn your thoughts off and just be so busy and you never work through something, right? You're just like, I'm gonna come back to that later, and you don't intentionally, and people kind of put it off. I think you have to make space for yourself to visit things alone and to be alone with your thoughts and be comfortable with that and process. I think that looks different for everyone. Some people do it, you know how to run. Some people do it in the shower, but just don't be afraid to be alone with your thoughts. And I think there's also a real bravery and processing that happens when you talk through it. And so speaking with people, I think for me, my mindset in life though too is always like, you go through things for a reason. And I think everything's very purposeful. And if nothing else, I want the things that I deal with, even the sad ones, even the loss, I want that to translate into something helpful for someone else, right? So if I can walk through a season of loss and kind of come out on this other side, I want to be able to talk through that with someone else and say like, man, I've been there too, and it's so hard. And just sharing in that experience, I think, is so healing for both people. So I love that part of life where you get to walk a similar path and look back and say like, wow, I did that. And now other people walking that, I can say like, hey, I've been there too.
How does your mindset differ from your mom and your brother in terms of processing things? Does it differ at all?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what all is going to be public on the podcast. They're great. My family actually was not super outspoken growing up. So I'm very different from them in that way. I'm kind of I joke with like my friends and family, but they're all kind of the same level for me. Like I'm kind of an open book. So I don't mind talking about things. I've actually had this conversation with people I've just met, like 5 minutes in. This happened to me a few weeks ago at our conference. I met this guy, and his dad came up for some reason, and he said, my dad was. I said, oh, did he pass away? And he said, yeah, I lost him a few years ago. And we immediately, 5 minutes into meeting each other, are like, yeah, like, and we shared this whole thing. And I think it's a really beautiful way to live life. And I think it's an interesting point that sometimes the way you grow up, you can be a part of that, or you can kind of go the opposite direction. And that was a little bit more my path, is that I kind of went in an opposite direction. But I think it's important to kind of honor the fact that, your upbringing still has such a part of who you become and shaping you. And so I think the achiever mindset definitely impacted me. I still have that 100%. I grew up a creative. I was always the oddball in my family, for sure.
Can we dive into that a little bit? Because I think about that a lot too. Like, I'm very different from my family.
Okay.
In many ways, we're similar because we have this, the same humor and jokes and things like that. But my interests and the way I live my life and the way I like to spend my time is very different. And I've often thought about that. I'm like, wait, why am I so different? So how do you think about that? Why do you think you're different?
I do think about it. I don't know. I spend a lot of time thinking about it because I appreciate it about my life. I think life is just choices, right? And so I think sometimes you choose to follow similar paths from your family, and I think that can be really beautiful. I think sometimes you're totally opposite, and that can be really beautiful. The thing I appreciate about my family, they're all, like I said, they're achievers. My brother is very academic minded. He's a doctor now.
What doctor?
He has an MD, PhD in tropical disease.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very specialized. So he's incredible, high achiever. He's great. Love him. But we went on very different paths, right? So I started actually in multifamily during college, started leasing apartments, and just kind of have never left. And so very different than like medical school and the very highly academic route. But growing up very creative, I've always been into like writing and creating. I thought I wanted to be in marketing for the longest time, which I've gotten to dabble in over the years. But my family is not that way. They're like math, science, engineering, brother's a doctor. My dad was a rocket scientist. But what's cool about it is I think that you can look back and say, even though I was like the oddball creative, I also have the good fortune of learning goal setting from my dad and being a very task-driven person because he was kind of type A, right? So I'm like a type A creative, which is unique. Mm-hmm. Like when you go into the workplace, I'm like, oh, there aren't a lot of people like me. I don't know.
How do you think that's played into like your ability to be creative? Like being type A, how does that influence your creativity?
I'm a very structured creative. I enjoy a schedule. I enjoy an agenda. I want things to be efficient. So it makes me kind of a weird breed. Is that I see both sides, and I think there's a place for efficiencies. Make some space to be creative and be intentional about spending time with your thoughts and coming up with new ideas and innovating. Super about that. I want meetings to go quickly. I don't want to waste a lot of time doing things that we shouldn't be wasting time on. And so I'm super passionate about, spending more time where it matters, I guess.
So what I'm interested in is when I think about my own creative process, right, where the best ideas come from.
Yeah, I want to know this.
It's usually, there's no structure to it, right? Like I may be walking and then I'm like, oh, this idea came up, or in the shower, which is a cliche thing, just like very spontaneously.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know if you are also structured, does that structure bleed into the creative process? Like, are you somebody that like is like, hey, I'm going to dedicate 2 hours on my calendar to be creative? Yeah. And does that actually work for you, or is that not how your creative process works?
A lot of the time, yes.
Wow.
A lot of the time, yes. Not always, but I do try to. I think there's a really important part of like learning yourself where you learn where you do those things best, right? So if you're looking for an innovative idea, or you're feeling stuck, or you're looking to do something creative, I'll try to very intentionally pursue time that I know will drive that. I'm also a shower thinker for sure. I enjoy a run. I wouldn't call myself a runner, but there are certain times where I think, this is what I need in this moment to be the best version of myself. And so kind of learning what that is for yourself, I think is really important. And I think structuring your time around that. I recently went to the vendor side, leaving the operator side. My background's in training, L&D, learning and development. And I'm still super passionate. That's just like the beat of my heart, right? And so in my current role, I'm not technically a trainer. I'm not technically an L&D. But I fill that part of my bucket by speaking. And I notice that when I'm preparing for something to speak, I schedule some time in advance. I make sure like I'm scheduling time in the shower, which is a weird one. But I also have kids. Like sometimes you gotta, find your time where you can. And at the gym, I'll intentionally, hey, during this week I'm gonna do more runs than I normally would because I'm working on the ideas for my presentation or what I want to go through. I'll make intentional choices, like instead of flying to the destination I'm gonna speak, I'm gonna drive. And that way I can spend some time just in the creative process, kind of running through what I want to say and how I want to show up and how I want to show up for everybody in that room,
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I find I'm most creative when there's a void of technology.
Yes.
Meaning when I'm like on a plane or I'm driving and I can't use my phone.
Yeah.
It makes a massive difference in your ability to just be creative and have ideas and all that. So that's why when people say like, oh, I don't like driving, I don't like going on flights, in some ways I really do, because it's like my one escape from technology, right?
That's
like I don't have to respond to this email and my mind isn't always racing as much, and I have that kind of creative freedom to think freely.
That's right.
So, okay, I want to talk about the L&D stuff. Yeah. I think learning and development, I think that it is such a hot topic in this industry. And I think we were talking before this. I want to know how you tie it back to like your personal philosophy in your life in general.
Oh my gosh. It is who I am as a human. That's what I've learned about myself over the years, is that I am super passionate about developing other people, pouring into other people, and really spend some time understanding the way that my path kind of brought me there, right? So I started on site. I was a leasing agent. I was an assistant manager. I was a manager. My first corporate role was recruiting, which I loved. So that was a fun one. But eventually, I kind of stumbled into training on accident. I had the director of L&D at the time at the company I was at just kind of said, like, you need to be doing this. And I said, okay. But it was a perfect culmination of all the time that I spent on site and how I had developed. So I had great experiences where I was really mentored and kind of nurtured as a leasing agent. And then as an assistant, given almost no direction. I'll never forget the first day when I was promoted. I showed up to the office. It was like 10 in the morning is when my new manager asked me to get there. And she's super emotional. It was one of those, like, the office was one big office. I didn't have a separate office for an assistant manager. And there wasn't a leasing agent that day. So the desks are all there, and she's just kind of like, here's your desk. And it's just covered in piles of files and like papers. And she's like, this is your desk. She's super emotional. She's like, and I need you to figure it out. And she goes into her office and she closes the door. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how to be an assistant manager, but I'm going to figure it out, right? And so I start like going through the files and all of that to say, like, I think so many times in multifamily, people could just get thrown in. And I had that experience. And so on one hand, I think it's kind of like sink or swim, and I'm an achiever and I'm a fighter and I'm super competitive. So I'm like, I'm up for this challenge and I'm absolutely going to do it. But I look at that experience and I think, what a better experience it could have been, and what could a really solid training department or strategy have looked like for me to be even more successful in my role. And so that kind of drove me. On one hand, I'm also naturally very curious. I want to understand how things work. I think that's the engineering part that I got from my dad. And I want to make things better. And I really want to make people better. Like, that's my driver. I'm very into like the why. Are you a Simon Sinek fan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Start with why.
Yeah. I've done the Find Your Why.
Okay.
And mine is really to empower others to reach their highest potential, just to inspire, to innovate, to create in ways that inspire others to be their best selves.
Where do you think that why comes from?
It's a great question. I don't know. It's just something I'm passionate about. I'm super passionate about people, about the relationships. I think multifamily is been such a beautiful place to kind of grow up in for me. I started really young. And so just kind of learning that the path to success is really about the relationships you build and how you can help other people is really a driving factor for me.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and what I was talking about was it's very hard to like change behavior, right? For example, if I were to tell you to like stop caring about that, or if you had some negative trait and I told you to like try to fix that, you can like try for a couple days, but ultimately you revert to the mean, you revert to yourself.
That's right.
And the way to actually change yourself is like you need to develop an awareness of like what is driving you and like why you are the way you are.
Yeah.
And because of that, I've just been thinking a lot about like how important your formative years are. From you have a kid. How old is your kid?
I have 4 kids.
Wow. How old are they?
I have an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and my youngest will turn 1 in December.
Okay, so you know this much more than me having 0 kids, but like the 0 to 6 age is so important, right?
Yeah.
Because like that's where a lot of the formative personality is developed, right?
Yeah.
I like sometimes I'm like, damn, like am I driving my life or is like my 4-year-old self driving my life, right?
Sometimes both.
Yeah, sometimes both. Yeah.
For sure.
So that's really interesting. And I just going back to the learning and development thing, I think what I want to know, and I'm sure many other tech companies want to know, is like getting onboarding right, like you said, is such an important thing. And it can oftentimes be a massive differentiator for tech companies, right? I often hear PMCs being like, oh, the onboarding was so painful, or onboarding was amazing.
Yeah.
What do you think that tech companies get wrong about onboarding? And what opportunities are they missing?
There's so much on both sides. I think, onboarding has so many interesting perspectives because you have your internal onboarding, right? You're onboarding, let's say at a PMC, you're onboarding new team members. And so if we're talking on the tech side, you're onboarding them on your tech. How do you train them? How do they develop all the new team members they have? And then I think something that we sometimes forget about is that even on the supplier side, the partner side, you do the same, right? You're onboarding new team members and they need training and support as well. And then you have that relationship, right? So you have your vendor partner and you have the PMC and you have to train them on the product. And so there's lots of levels of onboarding. I assume you mean the third, which is like training the teams of the tool you're deploying.
Exactly. And just to add to that, I think like what are using the creative process, something I've thought about is like, is there a way that you can employ like, even for our training, right? We build a AI leasing agent for and one of the ideas I had was like, well, why can't we like make this like TikTok-y or something and like create the onboarding more fun and engaging.
I think this is such a hot topic. I actually have so many thoughts about this.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us.
I think we were actually talking a little bit earlier about the style of things. We were talking about podcasts and how podcasts are kind of becoming, more common.
Yeah.
And I think this is totally a trend. This is a trend that I think we're really behind on, not just as like multifamily as an industry, but in general, like corporate, we'll call it corporate America, the corporate world really, is training teams and meeting people where they are. That's another thing I'm very passionate about. We have to meet learners where they are. So for me, when I was on the PMC side, I think, having varied types of content for people to consume is so important. You have people who want to self-serve and they just want to watch videos and that's great for them. You have people who want help guides and again, kind of self-service. You have people that want hands-on training and they want a human there, like one-on-one or in a class setting to train them. And so as many ways as you can kind of bulk up your training and offer multiple solutions for people to access training the way they want, I think is critical. And we miss it a lot of the time. But I think there is a tech component to it that no one has tapped into really. And I think there is like this opportunity for kind of a TikTok style or short form content. And I think it's a tough selling point because everyone does, they want the professional product, which I think is great. But what if we were comfortable with a professional product that was a little bit quicker to make and it's a quick edit, it's a more casual setting, it feels more real, almost like a recorded FaceTime, right? Like, let me just walk you through this real quick. But I think we have to get comfortable with the fact that people are okay with real humans. They're okay with a real human being. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can still be polished. It can still be professional, but it doesn't necessarily have to, happen in a thousands of dollars studio and we're going to spend X amount of time editing. I think sometimes, what is that phrase? Perfection is the enemy of progress.
Enemy of good, I think.
That's right. I mean, we spend so much time trying to just throw out a great product that sometimes we miss the window of when something is really needed. And I think that's a really common theme in L&D is that we're late to the game on a lot of things that we all know and admit are important, but we're also worried about solving the problem that no one's really trying to get their hands dirty just to see if anything sticks. So I'm looking for that. I want to see more innovation in L&D. I want to see more people talking about it. And I think this is a great type of conversation to launch.
Yeah, I think about this a lot too, just from like the marketing, B2B marketing as a whole. When I look at like consumer marketing, right, it's very fun and engaging, and there's just edgy. And when you look at B2B marketing, it's kind of stale and stiff and like corporate. And when I think about that, I'm like, at the end of the day, you're marketing to people and human beings. And human beings are designed, whether you're a consumer, you're a business, you have the same emotions, you have the same thinking.
That's
and
right.
I when I think about learning and development, exactly, it's like, it doesn't need to be this like stale, high production, like stiff corporate video. It could be like a FaceTime video that is just like casual and relatable. And because the whole goal is like, you want people to actually absorb the information.
Yes. And that's, I think, where so many people miss, right? When I started as a leasing agent, we had the VHS, and it's like the workplace harassment VHS goes in and you watch it and they're like, I'm Stan. And I think there was a place for that. And I think at the time that was, I'm sure, revolutionary. And they're like, this is great. Like we're checking the box, certainly. But I think that people enjoy content differently. And I'm excited to watch more people kind of look to meet people where they are when it comes to that.
Totally. Yeah. We were with Lacey, one of our customers from Case & Associates, and she was showing us the Instagram page for TSA. I don't know. Have you seen it?
No.
So, TSA. So
I'm like, I need to check it immediately.
It's insane. It's like the humor. You would think TSA,
stuffy,
security, stuffy. Yeah. It's like crazy humor. We should, look at it later.
Yeah.
But it's like really funny humor. The whole page is just like hilarious. And I'm like, it has 1.3 million followers for TSA. I'm like, that's a lot of followers. So people relate to that kind of content.
That's right. And I think there's an appreciation where you're like, TSA has this reputation, and here they are, like, not taking themselves so seriously. And that's what everyone wants, right? Like, we want to show up to conferences, and if someone wants to wear tennis shoes, like, you wear the shoes. My first op tech, I actually showed up, and I had this outfit. It was professional, but I did have tennis shoes, and a lady pointed them out and was like, you young people wearing tennis shoes, like sneakers, I'm glad to see it. And I'm like, you know what? That shouldn't be such a thing. Like, I want people to come comfortable, and I think that's an important part of embracing who we really are. And there's kind of a level of honesty I'm hoping to see in the workplace, honestly, to say these are real conversations, and let's just openly talk about the things we're struggling with, because that's the fastest route to solve them.
Okay, so we're both changing topics a little bit here, but we're both interested in like wellness and health and nutrition and all of that stuff. How do you see that playing into like your like ability to operate at work, and what do you find interesting about health and wellness?
Everything. I think everything is interesting. Have you ever done the Gallup Strength Finders assessment?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah. What is the rubric, or what is it like? It's not the Myers-Briggs. I've done the Myers-Briggs.
That's right.
I have done the Gallup,
strengths.
so I don't remember.
There's a long list of like potential strengths. I don't remember the actual number. It's like 40 maybe.
Yeah.
And it rates your top strengths, but it's one of those ones you like read and you're like, oh my gosh, that's me to a T. Like there's something really affirming about seeing them. But the one I wanted to mention is when I took this most recently, I'm really high on this one called Input, which is such a weird name for a strength. I'm like, what is that? Mm-hmm. And the description is like, you collect things. I'm like, that's not me at all. I don't like stuff. And I was talking to this consultant who was helping walk us through it. And she's like, no, or like information or ideas. I'm like, oh, that's me 100%. Like, I just want to be well-informed. I want to understand how things work so I can make really educated choices, but also help other people. And so health and wellness is kind of like that for me. I have 4 kids, so I want to be around for a long time, and that's really important, kind of a priority to me. My family is a huge priority to me, and so for me, health and wellness really helps keep me on track with kind of holistic goals. I'm a high achiever, which sometimes in the workplace could be dangerous, right? Because I'm all in. Like, I want everything to go as well as it can at work, and so the health and wellness piece, I think, for me is very it keeps me balanced, and to say, I'm going to go all in at work, but then I recognize I need to take breaks to show up well for my family and to show up well for myself. And you're showing up well for yourself, I think, is the first step of being the best version of you. Is if you're not taking care of yourself mentally and physically, like, you're not going to be operating on your highest level. And so I'm really interested in that. I want to be showing up as my best self wherever I am. If it's, flying home to my family later today, if it's speaking to a group, if it's sitting at a meeting, if it's meeting my Uber driver. And so I think it's important to kind of have that alignment with what does that look like for me? How do I know that and getting to know yourself, right? How do I show up as my best self? So I know that when I eat really well, I feel well and I'm going to show up well. I know that when I go for a run, it's not super motivating in the moment all the time. Like, I don't always want to do it. I did the 5K yesterday. Oh, nice. Did you know about this?
Oh, I didn't do that.
Okay.
The flamingo one?
I did. Not at all. I wasn't prepared for it. Not at all. I told you, I like to run. I'm not necessarily a runner. I haven't run in probably a couple of months. I've been trying to do the weightlifting thing. My husband's really into it.
What's your workout routine
right now? Right now we're gym people.
Okay.
Actually, for one of the first times in my life, I'm a consistent gym person. Uh-huh. So just doing a lot of lifting and strength training. My husband's background is super in that. He was a firefighter. I don't know if we've ever talked about this.
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
Wow. How did you guys meet, actually?
Oh my gosh. It's a multifamily story.
You guys met at multifamily stuff?
Sort of. So funny story. My mother-in-law was my boss for a really long time. So I worked for her for years. One of my favorite bosses, incredible leader, woman. So I worked for her for years and years. And when you work with someone, they're like, yeah, I have kids. You just kind of imagine probably 10 or whatever. I don't know. You don't really think about it that hard.
Yeah, you don't think about it that way.
But I met him at her family Christmas party.
Okay.
And we kind of hit it off.
And this is while she was still your boss?
In between.
It
was a gray area, we'll call it.
Okay.
No, she had actually just left the company where I met her and worked with her. She started a new company, and she was trying to convince me to go work there. I met her son. I actually ended up taking the job. She tried to convince me for months. I took the job. We met. And so there was kind of like is it okay to date your son?
Yeah.
We had this kind of kosher agreement of at what point. So eventually we parted ways just to make sure she's the president of a company. So at some point it's she's almost always my boss.
Yeah. So
when things got really serious, we agreed mutually, I'll find another job. It'll be weird to have two Schoellhorns at one company.
Yeah.
It's a little telling. But yeah, I essentially met him through multifamily. He did a stint in leasing in his early years, but he was a firefighter. And
that's awesome.
And
he's not a firefighter right now?
He retired, so we have 4 kids.
Okay.
He retired. At our third kid, we were actually home. I'm on maternity leave, and we were like, this is a lot of kids. He commuted. He was a Austin firefighter.
Okay.
So every 3 days, he would drive from Dallas to Austin. He would work 24 hours, and he would drive home. And so he'd be home for 48 hours. We just decided it was too challenging. Yeah. And we just had one of those kind of wild conversations. And thought, could you stay home?
Yeah.
You could. It's an adjustment for sure. And it's a challenge. It's a blessing. But I always say he's kind of more a hero to our family today than he ever was running into burning buildings. He's an incredible dad, incredible husband and supporter, and allows me to do what I love. So I feel really blessed to have him.
So how was that that must have been an interesting conversation, right? In terms of did you ever think about maybe you would retire, or was it just a natural kind of progression there?
No, it was just a weird moment.
It was just yeah.
This is a funny conversation. So we're home. We just had a baby, and firefighters, I don't know if do you have any friends, firefighters?
No.
They can't have beards because they have to be able to have the mask on their face. And so that's why firefighters have the mustache all the time. It's the only facial hair they can grow. So he's home and he's scruffy, and I kind of like him that way. And so I turned to him. I'm like, I love this scruff. I wish you could have it all the time. And he was like, well, I could. I just leave the fire service. And I was like, I don't want you to, but you could. And he's like, no, I could. He's like, well, what if I, stayed home with our family? And that's kind of actually how the conversation started, which is so wild. But we just kind of went down that rabbit hole. He actually, so we decided Austin was hard. We're growing our family. And this really goes back to priorities and like aligning with what we want to see in life. And we both really value family. He is also super deep in health and wellness, more than me. I'm just like a fan. He's like all in. He's very
with
into
food and meal prepping.
Yeah, he's into Peter Tia. Like,
oh yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you. Peter.
Yes,
yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
of course. So he's in all of it. Like he's in the ice baths. He's doing the sauna. Like he's in deep. So we talked about it. He actually made the Fort Worth Fire Department, and so that was awesome. Decided to turn it down because he's like, you know what? There's just nothing more important than our family and that legacy. And to spend time with our kids at home is so important. And so we do make a lot of sacrifices to make that happen. Like it's not, I'm not going to lie and say it's easy. It's tough to balance, but it's so worth it for, what we both kind of want. And so I think that's important. It's kind of like the North Star, right? Is what's your end goal? What do you want that's something we talk about all the time because we have a big family is what do you want your family table to look like in, 20 years?
If you were to design, like, it's funny, I think about this a lot. Companies have values.
Yeah.
But it's weird if families have like values, like formal values. If you were to design like values for your company or your family, what would they be?
I love this question. And I'm actually like, I wish I had thought of it before so I could come with really well-prepared answers. But I'm going to go home and think about this.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. Yeah.
For sure I will. Top of mind would be health for sure. Like prioritizing taking care of yourself and taking care of your loved ones. And I think there's something really important about relationships. So something in there about family and friends and loyalty and working hard for sure. Something we say in our house that we try to raise our kids with is any name really works, but we're like Schoellhorns never quit. And so we talk about that all the time, but it's interesting. You think about the things that shaped you. And then as a parent, there's this really interesting flip of the switch where you're like, now I'm in charge of that. And so I do think, that exercise is actually a great one. I'm going to take it home and think about that.
Awesome. What was the biggest like unexpected surprise or challenge about being a parent?
There's so many. I think it's that responsibility that just kind of hits you at some point of these are important years and I hope I don't mess it up. People talk about that all the time. There's no book for parenting, but it does. It feels kind of like a heavy burden of really like, it's a beautiful honor, right? To raise kids. And it's something I don't take lightly at all. But you have that thought in the back of your head, certainly, of like, I hope I'm doing it right. I just want to raise decent humans, and helping them prioritize what's important in life generally, too. I go to these parent-teacher conferences all the time, and they talk about the grades and, like, they're doing this well in reading and math. And I'm just waiting for them to get to the part where I'm like, but, like, is he kind? Is he a good listener? I want him to have those life skills because as long as I'm concerned with growing good humans. And I think as long as we can do that, we're doing our job.
Do you think there's like you said, you never really know if you're doing it completely right.
Yeah.
You also never can be 100% sure that there won't be something that like happens to them that's traumatic or anything like that.
You can't protect them from everything.
You can't protect them from everything. So how do you reconcile that fact? Right?
I don't think you can.
Yeah.
There's this moment as a parent where you just say like, the world is like a scary place, and anything could happen. There could be all kinds of terrible things, but you can't dwell on those things because they'd just be paralyzing. You just love them so much. And so trying not to get too caught up in that and just to do what you can to help them understand the world around them and try to help develop healthy mindsets and thoughts and, kind of help set that record of this is how I want your brain track to sound, as you grow, I think is important. And to be aware of the world around you, but not scared of it. It's hard. It's a tough balance. Yeah.
Okay. So you like you said earlier, you transitioned from being on the PMC side for a while to now the vendor side.
That's right.
What has that experience been like? What would you recommend or say for folks that are thinking about that decision or thinking about the inverse?
Oh my gosh. I think it's different for everyone. I think you have to do what's right for you, right? So I think there's a lot of soul searching that goes into it. For me, there's a lot of just really good questions to ask yourself. What kind of culture are you in now? What kind of culture do you want to be in long-term at a company? That was a top deciding factor for me. Both companies are great. I still have a great relationship with the PMC that I left. Love them, spend a lot of time with them actually. And you pour your heart and soul in, wherever you are. But I think on the PMC side, there's this like camaraderie that happens when you're in the trenches together. I miss that to an extent, but there's just a different kind of balance that I think being on the partner supplier side allows for. And that was something I was kind of looking for, was a little bit more of the balance, at least in this season. And so I think that's probably my best advice, is to say, what are you looking for in this season of life and what makes sense in this season for you? And just kind of finding what fits into that for you, and what ignites, that spark of passion for you. What about your work can be really fulfilling? And I think as long as you have an answer for that, it doesn't really matter which side you're on. I would say the biggest challenge has been, every stage that I've had in my job before now has been kind of like, oh, this makes sense now. And, after that, I'm going to use those skills and kind of build. It's almost like you're going across monkey bars. And each rung is like, it just makes sense to keep going. And then all of a sudden, when you go to the supplier side, you're like reaching across to another set of monkey bars. And so I almost feel like you're starting over, and you're like, the next rung is different than what I've done before. And this is helpful because I've done monkey bars before, but this new one is a little different. And so it's been fun for me as someone who's like a lifelong learner, and I love development, and I want to, get my hands dirty. It's been fun, but it's also been challenging because as an achiever, I'm like, I want to be really good at it right away. And so more starting over for sure.
What else are you learning or excited about in your life outside of work?
Everything. I think it's fun just to explore. I love things like this, honestly. So just kind of going out of the norm and creating, I think is fun. That's a fun opportunity. I think the big draw for me coming into the role I'm in today is the relationship building. Like, I view my role as I want to build relationships. I want to give people the tools that they need to be successful. And maybe it's, the product I'm selling today, but maybe it's just my advice, or maybe it's just my experience, or maybe something I say in a session that I speak at is helpful. And so showing up for people in that way, I think, is a really cool opportunity, just building bridges and relationships long term. So that's what I'm looking to do. I'm excited to keep watching, people innovate, and I want to be a part of that in whatever way I can.
That's great. Yeah, I've been thinking about content a lot too.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself naturally like, I never was really into marketing.
Yeah.
I consumed a lot of content, but I never produced any content.
Kind of makes you an expert though.
Really? Yeah, because I understand that. Yeah. And I think something I've been thinking about is, because I've gained so much from consuming content of others, I almost feel that if you feel like you have an interesting perspective or a unique perspective, it's almost your like moral duty to share that. It's your responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? And that reframe for me has been super helpful.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, now it doesn't feel, normally when you're doing this, it kind of, you have to get used to it, right?
Yes.
But now I'm like, this is like almost a moral duty, because the reason I'm sitting here today, launched my company, doing whatever I'm doing, is because I've taken so much inspiration from all the podcasts I've listened to, from the conversations I've had, from the advice from people. And it's like, well, you have to kind of, if you feel like you have an interesting perspective, you should share it on. And that's why it's cool to have people like you on the podcast, because it's really definitely helpful. Like, there's somebody that is going to listen to this and actually be inspired, or take a decision that they wouldn't have taken, or like made something of their lives that they wouldn't have otherwise. So
yeah, that's the hope. I think that's a really motivating factor for sure. I think I'm really excited for this, by the way. Did I tell you I did this on accident?
No.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm excited to be on your podcast, but when I reached out, I was like trying to find a slot to hang out with you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I reread it, and I was like, that was a poor way to word that, probably. I'm like, do you have any open slots to hang out? And you said podcast, and I was like, I'll do it. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's
I'm so
funny.
happy to be here for
That's
the record.
So funny. No,
a
that's
happy
awesome.
accident.
Okay, because I read that. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, she wants to be on the podcast. Let me check.
Yeah.
And then you kind of just like played into it. That's funny.
I'm like, we'll
I
do
think
it.
you're great,
yeah.
though. I think you'd be great at starting a podcast, too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's really kind. I would totally put content out there into the world. I post on LinkedIn semi-regularly, but I think there's a real bravery in getting comfortable sharing. And I think that sometimes there's almost this hurdle to overcome of people consuming content, and really understanding that heartbeat behind it. Is like, I do want to share, things about my life or my experience or even other experiences I've heard of to be helpful and to contribute. And I think you're right to kind of inspire. Like, I feel like I have this responsibility to help other people. And I hope that that's something that people take away. I'm sure they will from your podcast. I think that that's pretty obvious. But, I think everyone has their best laid wishes. And so I think that's the hope for a lot of content creators is I hope that they can see why and understand why we're here and why I do it, why I put content out there.
Jenny, thank you for being on the show. This was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to have this released.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Shiv. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Awesome.